I work from home, and even though it's great not having to drive to work and deal with annoying coworkers at the office, it does get stale staying home most of the time. I live in downtown Los Angeles, so I wanted to spend time out in nature, just to give me a break from the city life. I booked an Airbnb for the weekend in the secluded woods of Northern California. I wanted the full outdoor experience. The place looked amazing in the photos with tall redwood trees and a quaint cabin that promised a relaxing getaway. Little did I know that it would turn out to be the exact opposite. The forest was filled with all types of sounds that I wasn't accustomed to, and I say that in a good way. It sure was nice to take a break from all the police sirens and helicopters I hear night after night. As I entered the cabin, I was immediately struck by an eerie silence. It was like the inside of the cabin was cut off from the rest of the forest and was in a place of its own. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and focused on settling in. But as soon as the sun set and darkness engulfed the woods, strange things began to happen. At first, it was small objects moving on their own. I'd place the remote on the coffee table and go to the bathroom, only to come out and find the remote on the kitchen counter. Or doors randomly creaking open, and no, there wasn't a draft in the cabin. I tried to ignore all of this and enjoy my weekend getaway, but as the night wore on, the occurrences became more frequent and intense. As I was watching TV, I swore I heard footsteps through the cabin's empty rooms. I shouted, "Who's there?" and stood up to investigate. All the doors and windows were locked, so it was impossible that somebody got in. Then all of a sudden, the temperature inside got so cold that the hairs on my arms stood on end. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to message the owner, but there was no service out in the secluded woods. I was torn between whether I should just leave or stick it out through the night. It was already late, so I decided to stay. Whatever was in the cabin became more aggressive as the night stretched on. I could hear banging on the doors, and the windows rattled in their frames. I was too scared to move from the bed, huddled under the covers, hoping that it would stop already so I could go to sleep. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand grab my leg. I screamed, kicked back, and pulled down the covers, expecting to see someone or something standing by my bed. But nothing was there. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my stuff, and headed out to my car. I drove out of there, calling the owner and trying my best to explain what just happened. It was around 3 a.m. when I called, so he wasn't too happy about me waking him up in the middle of the night and asking for a refund. But eventually, he gave in to my request. I ended up spending my weekend at a hotel in the city. To this day, I still don't know what happened in that cabin, but I know that I will never forget the horror that I experienced that night. And I can only warn others to be careful when booking an Airbnb in the woods, as you never know what you might encounter. I remember the day I rented an Airbnb in the secluded mountains of Colorado. It was my first time there. The place looked perfect for a solo retreat with a stunning view of the surrounding peaks. The mountain air was refreshing compared to the pollution I was used to in my city. I was really looking forward to this weekend getaway where I could relax and take in the beautiful sights and sounds of nature. Little did I know I would spend the night in a living nightmare. As soon as the sun set, I was feeling tired and decided to go to bed early. It was a long day spent mostly driving and unpacking. Being alone, I made sure I locked all the doors and windows in the house and made my way to the bedroom. I settled down in the comfortable bed, ready for a good night's sleep out in the woods. Then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to noises outside of the house. I could hear rustling in the bushes, then heavy footsteps making their way up the stairs and onto the porch by the front door. And faint whispers were getting louder and more frequent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. and I could feel a cold sweat on my forehead. I knew whoever was paying a visit that late in the night was up to no good. I got out of bed and took a peek at the front door. To my horror, I saw someone trying to break in. I could see the silhouette of a man, his hands trying to pry the door open. A second silhouette stood next to him. I froze, my mind racing, not knowing what to do. I tiptoed back to the bathroom, locking it quietly, trying not to make any noise, hoping the intruders wouldn't hear me. But the banging and rattling continued, and I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering the address to the operator. I could hear the intruder cursing out of desperation, getting frustrated with the front door lock. Suddenly, the door gave in, and the intruders rushed in. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound while holding in tears. I could hear them searching the house, walking through the living room, the kitchen, then to the bedrooms. Finally, one of them made it to the outside of the bathroom and started turning the doorknob frantically. "She's here," he said. They then started running around the house and smashing things. I was shaking with fear, not knowing if they would break down the door. But then I heard sirens in the distance, getting louder and closer. Almost instantly, the intruders bolted out of the house, leaving me alone and terrified. It took the police a while to arrive, but when they did, they were able to find one of the men hiding in the woods. To this day, I still have nightmares about that night, and I'm grateful to be alive. I will never forget the horror of that Airbnb experience, and I urge others to be careful when renting a place in an isolated area. You never know who might be lurking outside your door. I remember the day I booked an Airbnb in the heart of New Orleans, Louisiana. The place looked charming in the photos with its vintage decor and old-fashioned charm. Little did I know my stay would turn into a nightmare. As soon as I arrived, I felt a strange energy in the air, as if the house itself was trying to tell me something. I tried to ignore it and settled into the cozy room, hoping for a peaceful night's sleep. But as soon as the sun set, the house came to life, and I knew that something was wrong. I could hear footsteps in the hallway, doors creaking open, and laughter in the dead of the night. The air was thick with an eerie energy, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. I tried to brush it off, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. One night, I woke up to a strange sound coming from the closet. It was like something was scratching the walls, trying to break through. I opened the closet door, and to my horror, I saw a pair of eyes staring back at me. I screamed and ran out of the room, not looking back. I went to the owner, hoping for an explanation, but he seemed unfazed. He told me that the previous tenant had reported similar occurrences, but he brushed it off as a mere coincidence. It wasn't until I did some research that I discovered the truth. The house was built on the site of an old slave plantation, where countless atrocities had occurred. The previous tenant had reported seeing the ghost of a former slave who was killed in the very same room where I stayed. To this day, I still have nightmares about that Airbnb experience, and I urge others to do your research when renting a place with a history. The past can haunt you in ways you never thought possible, and you never know what kind of energy you might be inviting into your life. I booked an Airbnb in a secluded area for my vacation, hoping to get away from the chaos of city life. The listing boasted of a serene environment and a charming cabin, and I was excited to experience some much-needed tranquility. But as soon as I arrived, I knew something was off. I was unpacking my things when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find a disheveled woman standing outside. She was muttering to herself and seemed to be incoherent. I was taken aback, but tried to be polite and asked her if she needed any help. She just stared at me with wild eyes and then walked away. Over the next few days, I saw her around the property more and more. She would stand outside the cabin and stare in, or follow me as I went for a walk in the woods. I started to feel like she was watching my every move, and it made me incredibly uncomfortable. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a noise outside. I went to check, and there she was, standing in the darkness, looking straight at me. I tried to ignore her and went back inside, but she started banging on the door, screaming at me to let her in. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I called the Airbnb owner, but they didn't answer. I tried to barricade the door, but the woman was relentless. She kept screaming and banging, and I knew that I was in serious trouble. Just as I was about to grab a knife from the kitchen, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. It was the police. I don't know how they found out about my situation, but they arrived just in time to take the woman away. They told me that she was a known drug addict and had a history of harassing people in the area. I was shaken up and could barely sleep for the rest of my stay. I couldn't believe that I had unknowingly booked an Airbnb in such a dangerous location. It was a lesson learned the hard way, and I vowed never to take my safety for granted again. I was excited to take my family on a vacation to a beautiful Airbnb we found online. The house was big in a nice neighborhood with plenty of space for our children to play, and we were thrilled to find such a perfect place for our trip. But things took a terrifying turn soon after we arrived. As we were getting settled, I noticed a strange man in the house across the street watching us from his window. He was staring at us with an unsettling expression, and I felt uneasy. I tried to ignore him and didn't bother telling my family about it, not wanting to spoil our vacation. For the next couple of days, I would find the man glancing at our house whenever he was out in his front yard. He would go outside while we were getting into our van. When we would come back home at night, he would come outside and pretend to be doing something like throwing out the trash, but I was on to him. I was getting annoyed and wanted to approach him, but still, I didn't tell my family about the strange man across the street. One night, my wife and 2 little daughters were playing outside in the garage. It was hot, so they left the garage door open. I was inside watching the game. Our van was parked on the driveway, partially blocking the view inside the garage. Suddenly, my wife noticed a shadow behind our van. When she went closer to investigate, a man jumped out from behind the van and started running across the street in the opposite direction. My wife started yelling at the kids to get inside the house. I was startled by the commotion and ran directly to the garage. When my wife told me what she saw, I immediately knew it was that creepy man from across the street, and I called the police. It turned out that the man was a registered sex offender who was on parole. He had been stalking us since we arrived. Fortunately, the house we rented had security cameras set up outside, and we found footage of him creeping up on my wife and kids and watching them from behind our van. The police arrested him, but we couldn't shake the feeling of being violated. We thought we were safe in our Airbnb, but we were wrong. I had unknowingly put our family in danger, and it was a terrifying wake-up call to never take anything for granted. I never want to put my family through something like that again, and I'm always on alert whenever we go to unfamiliar places. What is up, you guys? Hope you enjoyed these Airbnb stories, and if you did, please like this video. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe. Also, leave some comments too. If you guys want me to do any stories about certain topics, I'll be more than happy to do so. And I just want to thank everyone for subscribing. Channel is growing right now, so I really appreciate all the subs and all the likes and comments that you guys dropped. Thank you once again for watching this video, and check out my other videos here on Fairy Tale Phobia, and watch out for new videos as well. Till next time, take care and stay scared.